How many people here have grown mustard? Almost nobody?
We call it a weed.
Yeah, okay. And if you want to quickly answer me, other than that, that reason, why would you not grow it? The answer I usually get,
It's not Roundup ready.
yeah, it's not herbicide tolerant, and on a year after year basis, there's a limited market. It's very much oversupply can happen quickly. Acreage demand hasn't gone up for years, and the yields really haven't gone up for about 25 years either. So it's kind of fallen behind as a crop. And so for that reason, 5 years ago, the mustard growers of Saskatchewan and the Canadian Mustard Association got together and said, if we keep this up, what mustard in the world is used, which 80% had come from Canada, was soon going to be coming from Ukraine, because they were just taking our varieties and quickly slugging them in the ground with no inputs and then out competing on price. And so there was not much future for mustard the way it was. And so that meant, that we were 500,000 acres and shrinking quickly. And that's led to a bit of the price fluctuations of the last couple of years, where last year was so good because Ukraine didn't put as much in as they did not this year. But it still means that the supplies are up and down, and the industry has an uncertain future without investment. So 5 years ago, the mustard growers of Saskatchewan and CMA, as I said, put their monies together, which isn't a lot. It's only around 150,000, and then went out looking for partners and funding, and Agrisoma joined them and put in some more money. And then we managed to match it up till we had over 4 million from Growing Forward 1 to spend in the first 4 years. That significantly raised what we had to spend. Ag Canada only had 200 to 350,000 a year, depending on the year, to spend on all mustard research. So you can see why breeding didn't advance very quickly. And they also worried, 500,000, that's the top for world demand usually. Oversupply just means crash prices. We got to do something to make more uses and more opportunity in mustard. So that brings us to today, where we've now year 5 of funding. We've got Growing Forward 2, we got Western Grains, as you saw on the board over there, ADF. And so now we're up to almost $2 million a year budget for the mustard development. And so this is the first year you're starting to see some results from that investment over the last 5 years. And now we've got stable funding for the next 4, and hopefully after that the industry grows some and we get more checkoff dollars. Certainly a lot of the mustard production has shifted to Alberta, and so now it's probably 60-40 almost, and closing the gap quickly to almost 50-50. So it's has become an interest to some people, maybe not particularly quite in this area, but in the future that could change too. So what we have here is Brassica Carinata canola, and for the first time as you watch by them, you see a lot of them are labeled DH, whether it's Oriental Mustard or Brown. And when we switch to DH breeding and rapid cycling using chili in Florida in the winter, we're getting twice as many generations and much faster seed production, because typically after a new variety was released by Ag Canada, it'd be 3-4 years till it got to the marketplace. And now the year it's registering, we're already going that year or the following year. And then of course, with the Carinata's, those two types, the yield jump we've seen on some of the materials in this trial compared to the old common brown, for example, is 15-20% yield increase after our first set of new breeding materials, and slightly less at probably between 5 and 15% jump in the Oriental mustards. But they're DHs for a reason too, because we're also about to switch all of them to hybrids. And so the mustards will in the very near future become all hybrid mustards. All 3 or 4 types, I guess we'll say, even though 2, Oriental and Brown, are both Carinata. But they're all going to be hybrids in the very near future. In fact, we have some of them in trials this year, just up the road a little further on the other side of Coaldale, and up at Oyen as well. And we also changed our testing system. It used to be almost all Saskatchewan, with maybe a site at the Ag Canada station or something. Now we have 14 sites, and in Alberta we have Coots, Medicine Hat, Oyen, Coaldale, Kip, Coots, and one that we kind of say bridges the east corner for you, southwest for Saskatchewan, but it's actually US, which is Havre, Montana now. Peggy Lambs come on, and she started doing trials for us too as part of the Canadian registration and recommendation system. So you can see we've shifted the sites a lot to reflect where the production has gone more and where it may trend to go in the future, especially as we go into hybrids and have to worry about hybrid seed production and everything as well. Any questions so far? So then that brings us to the new species as well, Brassica Carinata, which, unlike the others, where the market tops out at around 400,000 or 500,000 acres a year, this one here probably can't top out if it was 8 million acres a year, because this is a biofuel crop. So we've done production, not too much right here, but certainly around Medicine Hat and up to Oyen and southern Saskatchewan on this species and in Montana. And it does very well with heat stress. It's a little longer season, but much higher yielding than the common mustards. I mean, it was 15-20% from day one above these types. And so it's very similar to hybrid canola under stress conditions. And unlike the other brassicas that can not take advantage of higher moisture like we just got here, this one will. In fact, it'll get so vigorous here shortly, it'll choke out any of the weeds around it. They'll just die from competition. So it's very aggressive that way and can be quite high yielding. We've discovered that in the southern US it grows beautiful as a winter crop, getting between 1 and 2 tons per acre down there for them in the winter when they were normally not using the soil at all, which obviously means it's frost tolerance too, because it's going into areas that have significant frost. And so it's also tolerant to all the stresses more, even including a bit of wet feet, which these guys won't like at all there at the back of their first rep. And this one at Medicine Hat's got so much water under some of it yesterday, and it probably won't hurt it unless it sits for a long time. So it's got a lot of things going for it, including if there's flea beetles around, which obviously there aren't too many here right now. They love this, and they do not like this.
Actually, we saw tremendous feeding damage on that side and nothing over here. It was quite impressive. You probably, if you look closely at the plants, you'll notice that.
So while we're excited about the condiment side, becoming more economical, because the yields are going to jump a lot in the next few years, whether it's the 15 or 20% that's the low-hanging fruit in front of us, and then what hybrids do after that, that'll unfortunately mean we just need less acres. But in this one here, it's about to turn hybrid too, and WestJet Air Canada alone, we always say as an example, would need 2 million acres just to fly Winnipeg West. So I mean, there's a lot of potential there for a lot more beyond that, because it's been tested now on 4,500 acres last year, the year before 5,000 acres, and processed the first year into jet fuel, and it made it the best biojet fuel they've ever done. No other vegetable oil could make the same fit, because you can't tinker with the jet engine, right? They refuse, the jet engine manufacturers, and nobody wants to tinker in midair, so it's got to be perfect. So this was the first product that came in with all the requirements for lubricity, for jet engine performance in the air. So not only did you reduce pollutants by 50% plus, but you also got improved air mileage and potentially as good or better engine life out of it, because it was the only one that had the lubrications required in the fuel for the rings of the jet engines, etc. So it's passed all the flying colors there. In the green biodiesel market, it also performs as a superior oil product. So now it's a case of getting customers to sign up the contracts to take the fuel, and that would have happened this year, except our federal government didn't meet their timeline of approving the meal from this for cattle feed, and so therefore Patterson Grain, who markets it to the ag community in Canada, couldn't go ahead and do it when they didn't have approval to sell the meal in Canada. So that meant and then the other side, we didn't have the RINs in place from the US government in time with their promise either, so both sides missed, and so we had a double reason. It would have meant we had to ship the crop to the US for crushing and bring all the meal back to Canada sell all the meal there and bring the oil back to Canada, where it would still trade at a lesser price because of not having the RINs, which is a US version of added value for biofuel. So for that reason, there is no production this year, unfortunately, which is kind of disappointed the mustard industry and obviously Agrisoma. But next year there will be a very significant program. for contracting. So Patterson Grain will start here in the very near future and start to roll out the commercial year one plan. So that's why it's of interest. They did beautiful up at Oyen when we did it there.
Does it respond to irrigation, or is it?
Nobody's done irrigation studies with it yet. So, I mean, based on what we see with 50 inches of rain in the winter in Florida, where it produced around 90 bushels an acre last year, it sure used the water when it got it. And there they didn't need to fertilize much, because if you went on tomato land, there was so much fertility in the soil already, it just went down and got it. But it likes nitrogen. It's very much like canola in all its nutrient requirements. And I just think it would respond very similarly, except it can get quite tall. Under those conditions in Florida, it reaches 6 to 7 feet. It then loops over to be around 5, but it's still more rank with high moisture. So
How about lodging?
it doesn't seem to lodge too much. They had no troubles in Florida, and we haven't seen any significant trouble anywhere. It will hoop like the canolas do. Typically in Saskatchewan, it's somewhere around here, and in Oyen it was about here when they had the high moisture year. But
Does it really go deep down? Or does it root really deep down?
certainly as deep as a hybrid canola, and other than that, we don't know. It may be deeper, we don't know for sure. It has a very aggressive plant style in general, and so it seems to be able to go get what it needs. But
It seems that shattering resistance is a lot better than canola.
yes, it's the best of all the brassicas that's ever been worked with. Better than Rapa, better than anything else. The only trouble is it did prove that it wasn't infallible, because we had last fall in the Shaunavon area, we had winds in the 80 to 100 K for 5 days, and we had rain of 9 inches, which they never get, all into 2-week period as well. And we actually had the pods in those winds and stuff break off, as well as some shatter. So they were disappointed with a 40-50% yield loss, but as we said, if you had, they still got 20 some bushels after the losses. So in the case of that's better than, or as good as their average would be anyways for any of their crops. And so from an economic return point of view, that would be very good. So if we told them at the beginning of the year, they'd have been happy if that guaranteed that's what they got. But they had a crop that was closer to 50 bushels, between 40 and 50. So it's disappointing to lose that much. But it just proves, if it's mature already and you leave it for 3-4 weeks afterwards, which is what they did, it's not infallible. It can fall apart if the weather's extreme enough. But Ken's right, it's really done well in all the U.S. trials and stuff too. And USDA's picked it up now as their flagship biofuel as well. Crop.
Camelina then?
Yeah, certainly in a lot of geographies, people are losing their interest in camelina and putting this one in instead.
I was actually going to ask you that question. It's more of a philosophical marketing type question. That we've kind of been, over the last 10 years, promised all of these great markets and biofuels, the camelina, the canola, and what's going to set Carinata above those other ones that seem to have essentially failed?
Yeah. Well, number one, they didn't have a partner like Patterson Grain, so there was not an assured, like growers to date, are promised the delivery date, and that delivery date is always been reached, except for the problems with the rail this year, which delayed a few weeks, and the payment's always been prompt and at the agreed upon price, not like the history of camelina. So it's got a black eye in Florida, where they produced like 26,000 acres and nobody could sell it for 3 years, and at 1/3 the price they signed the contracts for in the end to different buyers. And the same in North Dakota and South Dakota and Montana. There's a lot of horror stories, and then up here it's actually a lot less horror story than down there. But obviously we've had to live with that legacy that's gone before us, and so, but Patterson Grains made sure that doesn't happen. In fact, they're off doing some tours right now too, in the next couple of weeks, as they try to prepare for next year's first real commercial launch of the product. Now, obviously, Eric Johnson at Scott's had to do a lot of work on the herbicide side, because up till now we've had to rely on the old suite of canola chemistries from before the HT days, but he's rapidly bringing on some more combinations. This year, sulfentrazone was approved, and so it's now available for use, but there's other products that will be added every year or two, and we have developing, Eric and I, herbicide tolerant types coming down the pipeline as well. So they will arrive shortly, as will the hybrid systems come into play shortly too and boost the yields. But we're just opening the beginning of the can of the opportunity here, because it's very much the egg. There's no chicken here yet, because we've got a lot of genetic diversity. The breeding's been so minimal. I mean, Canada had to do things like, take the best from a cross and shake them and put them in a bag and call it a line, because they can only afford to test one line. And it's only with the new grower money and all the matching we've done that, to increase those monies, have we been able to get to a point where we have, about 32 sites in North America right now, of which at least half of them are in Canada, and several planting dates and seed studies, fertility studies, herbicide studies, herbicide tolerance work, all that package you need to make a successful crop. And from day one, the other difference from camelina is this had some herbicide options thanks to the earlier canola days. They didn't. And now we're growing that suite of opportunities in chemistry quite quickly here, thanks to Eric's work. Next year, maybe you'll want to invite Eric or something, because he could go into a lot of the detail that he's done on chemistry.
You're talking about everything, all the research is basically in southern states, or all of it in southern states. What is the maturity on?
The maturity is about 5 days later than the average mid-season canola. No. Southern Saskatchewan, it's not a problem either. We got extra days to deal with it. Any of the geography it's fitting in. It loves heat. It originally came from Ethiopia, and it loves heat. So it actually prefers some stress, just to push it along faster.
The other question is compatibility for feed source. Do they have to do some studies on here before they get the right mixture with the right feeding options so they can blend this in with
No, the U of S feeding study has done the cattle studies already. And so we know that it can be used as a feed fine. I mean, it's higher glucosinolate, so it has a mustard taste today. But these new varieties in front of you here, I mean, the A110 is the current one and going to be commercial widespread next year. But these are ones that are coming in lower glucosinolates. But even with the high, a 10% inclusion rate is approved for all North America. And it's a better protein source. It's equal to or better than soybean. And it's better than canola. So for the total available protein and the low fiber. We're just doing the studies now, and yes, it should, but it's, yeah. South Dakota is doing it at their dairy research, as is Florida and as U of S, so it's being covered off as well. But right now, it's the beef cattle industry that's accepted it first, but it'll spread, and as we lower the glucosinolates through breeding more, it'll fit into the non-ruminant category eventually too.
What would the net return
Well, a fair bit more depending on the year. Like last year, the condiment mustard prices were so high that they were probably the number one earner, but that's really, really rare that they were as high as last year. But average, so far, the 2 years, well, it's priced the same as canola basically, I guess is what I can say. So the economics are fairly similar, except it can go on poorer land, right? We say right today that without hybrids, if you can grow canola and get 40 bushels or plus, then grow canola. If you're in an area that has some stress or you can't irrigate that area, pivots don't reach, whatever, then it's a good thing to fill in with, and it'll probably outperform canola on the dry land part. But it's fairly comparable. The range we've seen so far with those 2 years of commercialization was 5 to 10% less than canola in yield under high moisture and cooler temperatures, and 10-15% better than hybrid canola in most of the stress conditions. So, but you can also, we've also seen it where you get 14-15 bushels, and canola gave almost zero because it couldn't take the heat stress. So in Montana, that's important. Havers had some tough years lately in Moccasin, and this here comes through and the Naples can't. So it has an advantage of the extremes, especially.
What are the potential increases with going to a hybrid system with these crops?
Well, that's a big change for the industry. I mean, seed growers have mostly been Saskatchewan, but they have not had to put the care and attention to it that you do here with canola hybrid seed production. And certainly it will change.
But is that going to be compatible, having hybrid seed production and hybrid mustard production or Carinata production in the same local areas? Not necessarily the same field, but
Yeah. Well, they don't cross that easily, and they're usually sterile if they do.
okay.
So that part is not a big concern, but it's more a concern, say, for the mustard markets, like these guys over here, the condiment, because their GM contamination reduces their European sales. On this here, for fuel market, who cares, right? Nobody cares. So a little bit of GM, a little bit of canola in it, even a little bit of wild mustard in it, it's not a heavy dockage issue. So it has some unique ability there, and that the level of scrutiny by the Grain Commission, that, as instructed by Patterson and stuff, was not to be as hard on it as the canolas or the mustards, because it has more leeway in its quality and still meeting its end use parameters. So
Any thoughts on what coming year's contracts might look like as either a dollar or a percentage of another crop, or
Patterson right now, the growers on year 1, year 2, their main wish was to have it trade pretty much equal to canola and move with canola. So that's what they were prepared to offer. And when they had to get canned this year, there was lots of complaints that, well, now we wish we hadn't said that because we don't like the low canola prices. But the reality of the world is that, you know, whether it's soybean oil, corn oil, or canola oil, they all have to trade against each other pretty well. And if the market's down, the biofuel sector is not going to pay. They're going to switch to those. So while that's a no-no in Europe, and they're being told to get out of using canola for bio products, so they're going to have a major trend away from canola use, which now 40-50% goes there. That's got to change in their market, and so they're quite interested in this crop as well. The demand to try it around the world is huge. I mean, there's so many countries asking us for trials, and we have a list of about 5 that we're allowing to try it right now. But it's a Canadian product for Canadian farmers first, right? And it's sponsored by the Canadian, mustard growers and the Mustard Association. So we have to be, and of course, Canada's put up 10 years of work into this too. So even though Agrisoma now has the bigger breeding program and everything, it's still very much a partnership with government and industry and growers. And we have to honor everybody's commitment and financial investment to date.
On that note, there's no mustard commission in Alberta, so is there any checkouts collected in Alberta?
Not much. There are a few producers that grow significant mustard here that voluntarily give a checkoff to SMDC in Saskatchewan. So that's a new trend that just a few have started. But it is a concern for the industry, because we've been told by Growing Forward too that, right now they're matching 3-to-1. The next time we go asking, they'll be matching 50-50 only, and it'll keep going down every time we go back till we're self-sufficient. So we have only 2 ways to do that, and that's to collect from the Montana growers and Alberta growers as well, probably raise the checkoff as well as we get better varieties, and then look at what other opportunities there are to have more money come into the industry to fund itself too. But it's a whole new segment, and hopefully the acres are enough to start. Right now, you're getting a checkoff from only half of the 400,000 that are planted, for example, this year. And so if we can get that to 100% by including Alberta and Montana, that would be a big help. And a few would keep requesting it back in Saskatchewan, because you can do that. There's a few growers that are big that do, and it'd be nice if they would stop doing that and leave the money in, because right now we only get 90,000 a year from checkoffs. And that doesn't go very far on this kind of a budget. So we've really got to have it across the industry, and quit giving our varieties to Ukraine too, because now everything's being PBR'd. I'm in charge of that as well as seed production too, because we can't let it steal. And some of our university professors have been the worst at sending it to friends in Ukraine and stuff, and then all of a sudden it goes commercial. And some of our actual mustard producers have been terrible at it. They just want another market to compete with us, so they go and contract a container from here and then give it to Ukraine for seed. And so they've been our industry enemy in a way, even though they're kicking in another way with their memberships. But it doesn't pay for the lost opportunity for our producers.
Any idea on contracted acres, what you guys have a target for next year?
Quite a bit. I have to leave it to Patterson to announce that, but it will be, many times over the 10,000 acres we've grown so far.
So that crop next year is going to be a hybrid crop? Or
No, the variety for next year is here, By the way, this material comes in purples and reds and all sorts of interesting things. So we made one just so everybody can tell if there's a seeding error or a board of the plot. We've made one line just to stand out and yell at you. It also comes in white flowers, cream flowers, yellow flowers, things like that. Up here there's one called A110, which is the last one of the Ag Canada shake in a bag, the shake and bake varieties we called them, where you blend a bunch of lines together and shake it because you can't afford to test it as individual lines. Hugely better on blackleg. It just does not get blackleg. But on Sclerotinia, I would say it's somewhat similar. It's usually a little better on most things, but we don't know enough, so we just say it's similar.
How long would the volunteers last in the soil? Worse than canola or the same? Or
Same as Naples. Much better than Rafa. Yeah. It's actually probably shorter lived than Naples even in the soil. It's a very large seed size and it's yellow seeded. It's a bright yellow around the very biggest hybrid canola you've seen. So it's about a 5.5 grams 1,000 seed weight, which is given it, I mean, you see the advantage of that up at Medicine Hat, where it's way ahead and much more vigorous than the other, thanks to the large seed size than the hybrid canola was there. But Mike tells me it was a smaller seeded hybrid canola variety, so they do vary a lot, as can this species, but the selections to date have all been large seeded. I mean, if you come back, and I'd encourage you to come back and talk to Farming Smarter later on in the year, or the other side of Coaldale, the plots there, or wherever you see them, because there's really phenotypic differences. We still have types that look like Christmas trees. In other words, they're very branched. They all branch a ton. They're short racemes. They never look like they're fully in flower because the flowers are down in the crop. Like this is as high as you'll see, and then the crop keeps going tight, but the branches keep coming out and flowering down in there. It's not on the top. I mean, maybe that's partly how it avoids heat stress. I don't know. By keeping the humidity high, and yet it doesn't have a bigger problem with Sclerotinia or high humidity diseases than the other brassicas. It's similar in most cases or better. It certainly doesn't have a problem with blackleg at all.
What about insects like or fabials you talked about? What about stuff like ligus and seed wheel?
I would say it's the same as Naples. I mean, I had them at Medicine Hat side by side, and there was bad seed pod weevil here a couple of years ago with Farming Smarter, and they both were infected pretty similarly. So, I mean, a lot of these are changing to double haploid lines now too as we prepare to go into hybrids and to get PBR properly to protect the Canadian crop in other markets. I mean, that's been important too, so we need to get more pure varieties.
Who's doing your hybrid production?
Nobody right now. That's a new opportunity for the future, I guess, is who will do it and where.
Plots are they at High Tech then in north of Coaldale? Is that what you're talking?
That's where the other plots like this are, yeah. They have a set of stuff too, yeah. But there is no hybrid seed production with anybody. Yeah. Well, obviously they'd like to, but so would a lot of other people, and there's been no discussions with anybody on that. We're a little bit ahead. I mean, doing that. I mean, the first hybrids, and I wish I could show them to you here, but Sinapis alba, or hot dog mustard, is the first of them to going to be hybrid probably, and we have hybrids at the high-tech farm right now. But they're all made at Ag Canada, Saskatoon, or in Chile at the farm there. They're not made anywhere else. They're just intense, right? So they're very small productions. But we are trying the Sinapis alba because that variety really has not moved in yield forever. And there was no diversity left in the Ag Canada program, so we quickly tried to change that and then convert it to a unique style of hybrid. It's not the Ogura hybrid system like a lot of canola and like most producers. Any other questions? I never got off page 1 of what I wrote down to tell you, so and there was 4 pages, but I'd rather go with just questions. So there are growers' manuals every year we put out a new edition. It's on the SMDC website, on the Agrisoma website, and there's copies, a box of them in here I left beside the table today too. Now obviously there is no 2014 production, so it was produced because we just do it every year, and there'll be a new 2015 with Eric's new herbicide rates and recommendations in the new book, so it's updated every year with new yield results as well. But obviously you're welcome to the 2014s because they're quickly going to be out of date. But they do tell you the rates that are recommended today, which are usually the lower rates of most of the chemistries. Right now it's usually ethafluorine or trifluorine that's put down first, and then because it's so competitive with weeds, most growers may never have to do anything else, and maybe post or grassy control early on, and usually that's it. There's no broadleaf control in crop because it chokes them all out. It'll choke out kochia, it'll choke out most everything if it's off to a good start. You see
vouch for that.
Yeah, it's quite aggressive with its branching style for sure.
Done there?
Yeah, I'm done. Unless you want more questions, I mean, you probably don't care about the world accessions and how many we've worked into the breeding and all that stuff, but the mustard growers in Agrisoma have the world's largest collection of this type of mustard, with almost 1,000 lines in their research studies now. So it's gone from the original 28 Canada had from Ethiopia to a much bigger initiative, hence the discovery of the purples and stuff that we can do and some of the other unique morphologies. We've also got some new types that instead of the short racemes, they're about 1.5 meters long each. And so I don't think we want that type either, but something in the middle might be nice someday. And these only have 4 to 8 pods per raceme, but those other ones have in excess of 50 pods per raceme. So somewhere in the middle someday is probably what's going to make the best hybrid. But anyways.
Well, thanks Daryl, and join me in thanking Daryl for his presentation.